everyone. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you most of all for the organizers for putting on this whole show. I'll introduce myself. I'm Daniele. I'm a director of engineering at Canonical, where I lead the company's documentation practice. I'm a Django project core developer, or was when that was a thing. Been involved in open source software for many years. Python community organizer. I see several people in the room who have actually been with me to one African Python event or another, which is nice. And probably what I'm most well known for is my work on documentation, the Diataxis documentation framework that I think many people might be aware of. That's what I look like on television. I live in Cardiff, UK, or Leiden in the Netherlands. I'm at Canonical, which is the company behind Ubuntu, you probably know. We're growing. I'm hiring. I'm hiring about 120 technical authors. So I've done about 20 so far. Still many to go. Developer relations engineers, CMS engineers, then some other roles that I'm not actually the hiring lead for, but I'm involved in, like engineering directors for disciplines like community and developer relations. And there are all kinds of Python competent engineering positions in Canonical for anyone who's interested. There's a link there that has a kind of tracking code in it. Use that, because then Canonical know that PyCon Italia is a good place to send people to hire people. It's always good for the conference when a potential sponsor knows what they can get from a conference. And please come and talk to me about Canonical or jobs at Canonical. I'd be very happy to talk to you about that. I added Mary Oliver into my slides last night because I was thinking about her while writing this, while writing a talk about being attentive. She's one of the most significant American poets of the last 100 years or so. It's funny, if you ask ChatGPT or some other autocomplete bot to write you a short poem in the style of Mary Oliver, I pretty much guarantee that the poem is going to have the words wild and life in it. That's, this is a talk about attention. This is a fragment of a much longer poem sometimes. Instructions for living a life. Pay attention. Be astonished. And tell about it. And poets and programmers, we have this in common, at least one thing, that we both do things with words. And I'm fascinated by the relationship between programming and other arts. And programming, by the way, it is an art. You know, I know that it's an art, it's a craft, it's a skill. I know that computer science exists, but that's a different matter altogether. It's nothing to do with programming. What kind of art is programming? What does it have in common? And what is different when you compare it with painting or playing a musical instrument or photography or poetry or writing music? What's going on in the programmer and these other artists? What meaning and values do we find in all these different arts? And also a question that's interesting, what does it matter for me as a programmer? Because I'm quite interested in myself, so knowing how these things play out on me matters. So I really love programming, but honestly, I'm not going to win the Nobel Prize for programming, not soon. And it doesn't bother me that much. I would like to be a better programmer, but I'm content with what I can do. I came to it so late in life that it seems like everything is a bonus. On the other hand, that I can't play the guitar better than I can, that causes me a kind of pain. And I envy the people who have that craft, that talent. I wish I could be like them. That my range of skills in the kitchen is so limited. Or in photography, I can see and understand so much about it, and I want it so badly, but I know I will never have it. And actually, that really hurts. I'm sure you know Henri Cartier-Bresson. He said, "Your first 10,000 photographs are the worst." And that's probably true. But what he neglected to mention is that as soon as you stop, the counter gets reset to 0. I think that's what happens to me in any case. But I still find my consolations. I'm really fascinated by programming and photography, but also by computers and cameras with the machines of those arts, of those disciplines. I love machines. I love messing about with computers and cameras. And certainly the pleasure that I have in the equipment of these arts, the equipment that other people have made, adds a dimension to my life as a programmer in one hand, and in photography, it takes away some of the sting of knowing that I'm never going to be really good as a photographer, because I get pleasure in those things too. So in programming and photography both, we have really wonderful machinery to enjoy. And I think an affection for the machinery is part of programming for many people. I know in photography, people are really sniffy about equipment. You know, fussing about it, being interested in equipment is for amateurs. Well, I'm an amateur. I think an affection for the machinery is important. I think the relationship between the practitioner and the tools of their craft is an important part of the craft. But I think that the key to programming specifically as a craft lies in something else. I was interviewing a technical author candidate a few months ago, and I asked her, "What do you enjoy about programming?" And she said, "When I'm programming, I'm a little god. I create a world, and I set it in motion, my own little world." And I get that. I know how she feels. Actually, as a programmer, I think I know how God feels. God at the beginning of time, you know, with a new text editor window open, a blank page and a blinking cursor. It's the moment before creation. So, I've been there too, God. I know it. So God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And that's how it is in our programs. We say, "Let such and such be the case." And then indeed, it is the case. Because we said it. In fact, God even talks like, sorry, am I making a lot of noise with this thing? I should try and stop waving my arms about. God even talks like programmers do. You know, in programming, we use the form, "let such and such be the case." It's the same subjunctive mood, although in Python we use it implicitly. We say x equals 1. It's a way of saying, let x equal 1. In BASIC, you would use the word let x equals 1, I think in Lisp too. Actually, I think that's a better way of doing it. If Python were more correct, it should look like this. We would say let x equal 1, and then we could have a nicer equality operator doing without that double equals sign. I think that would be more correct. If anybody else wants my advice on designing programming languages, come and see me afterwards. I'm here for the rest of the event. But anyway, look, that's not the point. Is that in programming, we can make things come to pass just by saying them, just like God. Amazing. This is programming as creativity in the most fundamental sense, which is of bringing things into being, of creation. What we will comes into being through our will. Is there anything else in your world that you can will into existence? Anything at all? I can do all kinds of things in the world, but they might be expressions of my will, but they're not bringing things into existence. Bringing things into existence is not the same as merely doing. In the world, I can move a chair, I can pour a glass of water, I can turn on a light. That's doing. And I can do the same things in Python. I can end a loop. I can add two values. I can call a function. And bringing things into existence is not the same as merely commanding, because I can tell my colleague to schedule a meeting, or my children to make less noise, or the taxi driver to take me home. And in Python, I can also command. I can tell Python to print something, to initiate a connection, to return a value. But I can do something in Python that I cannot do in the world. In the world, I cannot make something the case just by saying it. Saying something doesn't make it so. No matter how hard I will it, there will not be light just because I want there to be. I cannot bring things into existence. But in Python I can, literally. I can let x equal 1. I can bring an object into existence through will alone, just by saying the words. So programming is about the will, and that includes the will of doing, as I showed you a moment ago, of commanding, but this very special will also of making things so, of bringing things into existence. That is really amazing power. So programming is this world of intention. We're programmers, we're full of intention, programming our will in symbols to be executed by machines. Programming is the expression of our will. Thy will be done. I love automated testing. We write some code to do something, and then we write some more code to check up on the first code to make sure it was doing it properly. It's like sending somebody, go to the shops and buy some bread. Say, okay, and you go and follow him and make sure he actually did it. So everything we do in programming is about making sure that our will is enacted. You know, our agile workflows, our automated testing, all the values of our discipline, they're aligned around intention and making sure that what we will gets done. So for us, success means successfully bringing about what we intended. And I think we find the meaning and value of programming in creativity and its meaning as intention. I love it. What a bonding experience it would be to sit in the bar quietly at the end of the day with God to talk about all this. We would really understand each other, I'm so sure. We're in the same business. And intention itself is such an interesting word. To intend, it's from the Latin to stretch or reach towards. And there are these constellations of verbs and nouns that spread out from that. Did you know that even wounds, in medicine, wounds have intentions? Look it up. Their wounds have, you can have first and second intentions of wounds. Anyway, tracing all these meanings and connections is like tracing rivers and roads and mountains on a map. And these things don't prove anything, but they tell us something. They highlight things for us. So, for example, we have the word meaning in English that's wrapped up both in intention and in significance. Whereas in a language like Italian, words like intendere and significare, they occupy more different spaces. But back to, for example, you know, we have stretching, so we have tenda, curtain or tent in Italian, tienda, shop in Spanish, all from those same roots. But back to programming as intention, we can see that richly and powerfully, programming is about this stretching out towards the world with our will, to impose our will upon it. It's thoroughly active. It's about doing, commanding, making things the case, making things come into being. But I think it's possible to become wrapped up in all this intention. Because intention is not the only kind of meaning. There are other clusters of words and meanings around here that tell us different stories. So, attention, to pay attention, to attend, it has the same origins of stretching, but of a different kind. Here the roots are of stretching to rather than stretching towards. Perhaps it's about making contact rather than reaching towards something that doesn't yet exist. It's still about meaning, but it's not about the will. It's the meaning of being there with something, attending. And where is our attention in programming? Where is the attention of programmers? What has being a programmer done to my power of attention? I love programming and I love photography, though I'm not very good in either art. And if I'm not a good programmer, it's not because I lack intention. You know, I am full of will. I don't lack will. But I can tell you exactly why I'm not a better photographer. It's because my power of attention is weak. My power of being there, of being present. The photograph I showed you on the title slide is by Garry Winogrand. If you ask me for my favorite photographer, probably I'd mention him. He's the one who fascinates me the most. He was staggeringly prolific. By some estimates, he made well over 1 million photographs. That's, if you put down the negatives and laid them down end to end, they would stretch for about 40 kilometers of 35mm film. When he died, he left behind also a stunning quantity of photographs that he hadn't even printed. I read an estimate that it adds up to something like 300,000 unedited images. That's several thousand rolls, not photos, that were developed but not printed. Thousands more that were printed only to contact sheets. And amazingly, several thousand rolls that were not even developed. In other words, several thousand rolls of photographs that he never saw. Stephen Shaw, who's another great photographer, said, well, Winogrand didn't need to see his photographs to know what they looked like, any more than Beethoven needed to hear his music to know what it sounded like. Winogrand said, I photograph to see what things look like when photographed. He said, I photograph to see what the world looks like in photographs. He said, a photograph is what something looks like to a camera. Actually, in quite a remarkable number of his photographs, what it looks like is that somebody's going to come out of there and punch him in the face. And I think the reason for that is probably a lot of those people in those photographs would quite like to have punched him in the face. He took most of his photographs with a 28mm lens. And I don't know if you know how close you have to get up to somebody to take a photograph like that with a 28mm lens. So much of the time he was literally in people's faces. And that's no wonder that he would get looks from people like these. And mi devo fermare? Okay. I don't think he really got punched because he worked too fast. He was there and gone before anyone had a chance to do more than realize what was happening. A photograph in a thousandth of a second, he would walk down a street in the length of a short city block. He would have fired off an entire roll of 36 frames. 2 cameras around his neck, actually, so that... But what does Winogrand have to show us or tell us about the power of attention? Well, look at this. So this is 1964, the Texas State Fair. And imagine in all this busy hustle and noise and motion of the event, there's an animal and its handler, and they're both part of the excitement. And the animal is weaving backwards and forwards, swinging its head, and the handler is ducking away from it. And in all that movement, in all that flux, in all that chaos, this, these colliding and evading bodies, there was one instant where the tongue of the steer met the brim of the handler's hat in this perfect symmetry, resolving this kind of perfect symmetry, this order out of disorder, that in the next instant would have just dissolved back again into disorder. And that symmetry, that meaning, was there, available only in that instant. 250th of a second. Only available from that precise point of view. Only along that precise line of sight. Something that maybe would never be repeated again in the lifetime of our universe. And Garry Winogrand was there to capture it. How? What kind of power was this? To be there so much with such totality of presence. I look at that and I just feel a bit weak. That's the power of attention, of being present. This might be the photograph that I love best in the world. I get lost in this photograph. I play it back to myself sometimes with my eyes closed, trying to remember it, trying to put it back together. I look at it and I follow its patterns, its rhythms, the variations, the disjunctions, as if it were a piece of music. I think I will never exhaust its forms and its relationships and reflections, all those combinations, every direction, every angle, every bend of elbow and knee, the hands, the eyes, and the mouths. And it's there, somehow, in one photograph. This doesn't happen by chance. I'm staggered by his awareness. What we're seeing here is an ability to cut through time and movement with a plane of a photograph. This is a superhuman feat of attention. I get shivers on the back of my neck sometimes when I look at this photograph because of what it means, because of the power that I see in it. I could spend the next 40 minutes talking only about this photograph, but look, I don't blame myself as a photographer for not being a superhuman, because most photographers are not. I'm not an Olympian of attention. Most people are not. But I know what that power is. I understand it. Or I've touched it. I've just occasionally, I've tasted it myself. I think this is the best photograph that I've ever taken, August 2010. It's the one I'm proudest of. It was a time when I was working really hard on paying attention, on being there, on being present. It didn't happen by chance. I was able to bring that order and meaning into existence through this power of attention, resolving, order and relationship out of the shifting and moving components of the world. Now, I spend so much of my life immersed in intention. As a programmer, it's all about intention when I'm programming, which is not that often, actually. My job as director of engineering, I direct, I instruct, I make sure that my will is done, enacted by 1,000 or so people at Canonical. I'm actually reasonably good at that. But I look at this picture to remind myself that I once or could have the taste of another kind of power, the power of attention. And I want that power as much as I want the power of will, of intention. So look, just like poets and God, we can do things with words, with symbols. Symbols that express our will, that are maybe enacted by machines. We make things happen, we do things, we command, we direct, we bring things into existence. I can do things with words in the world, except maybe the first one. I can't bring things into existence. I can do that on the computer only. But look, with words, I can instruct and command and direct and so on. I can even, with words, make things happen, or at least try to. I could write a love letter hoping to procure a certain effect, or write a threatening letter to my enemies. But that's not the only kind of thing that I do with words in the world. Maybe I write a love letter not to have an effect, to express my will as an act of intention, but to say something about something, to express something that I see or feel, to say that I am there, that I have paid attention to something, and that I want or need to say it. I don't take a photograph to express my will. A photograph has meaning, but it doesn't express my intention. Instead, I think a photograph expresses my attention. That's why I photograph, to capture something, to show something, to express my being present. It's about my being there. Have you ever written a program about something? Not to do something, not for something. Have you ever written a program about something? I'm not saying you haven't, but I think if you have it, I think it's pretty unusual. A story or a photograph can be about something. Can a program be about something? We never really hear of a computer program that is just about something. Maybe it's not possible, or maybe we've just missed it. We can write love songs and love poems. What would a love program look like? Could such a thing even exist? I mentioned earlier that I'm really fascinated by the relationship between programming and other crafts. I love the connections that I find, and I can give you a glimpse into that. So, for example, those of you who work in engineering teams, you're probably well aware of the problem of developer exhaustion. Yes? The overworked developer, burnout. It's what happens when you ask more of the developer than the developer has to give. And it's familiar. It's a known problem. I'll show you a couple of pages from a book on the subject. Sorry, a couple of pages on the subject from a book that was published even before I was born. Developer exhaustion. It's what happens when there's not enough active chemicals left in your developing solution to react with those in the film. I don't know if you can read it. Actually, developer exhaustion. And I'm a developer. I do my developing at home in the bath. And like the rest of my photography, maybe not very expertly, but I enjoy it a lot. I'm thrilled with my results. Did you know that you can develop your film with a developing solution made of instant coffee, vitamin C powder, and sodium carbonate? Look, this is one of my photographs developed with instant coffee. Not the best example of darkroom skills, but I did it with instant coffee and vitamin C powder. So I have such a lot of fun with photography, and some of it's about taking photographs, and some of it's about the other stuff of the craft. Earlier I mentioned the consolation of machinery, the affection for computers and cameras, for programmers and photographers. I love cameras. I think they are such beautiful machines. And my cameras are not expensive ones. They are all old 5mm cameras, and I have to seem to spend a lot of time repairing them. This is one of my very favorite cameras. It's the 1972 Canonet G3 QL17. What a mouthful of a name. And I know this camera really intimately, almost every single piece of it. Many of the components you see here, I have disassembled completely and rebuilt. You know, the rangefinder, the exposure mechanisms. I spend a lot of time inside my cameras, repairing and servicing them. And some of the pleasure of that comes from being able to do it. That is a pleasure, being effective at that. But a lot of it all comes simply from being able to understand them. I want to know them. Do cameras have souls? Well, actually, sometimes I think they probably must have souls. That's what it feels to me after an encounter with them. The richness of the personality. There is something in a camera, I think, a mechanical device, that seems like it is worth knowing and worth meeting. I want to be with them. I want to know them in the same way that I want to be and to know somebody that I love. I want to understand the thoughts of the camera, almost. So these mechanisms, these delicate, intricate physical mechanisms, they encode logic and processes. There are sequences of events described in these levers and springs. They're alive with meaning and intention. And nobody explained these things to me. I had to work them out through my encounters with them. When I'm working on one of these cameras and seeing how it works, understanding how it works, it feels like I'm deep in an intimate conversation with the person who created it, its designer. And it feels sometimes that we're talking across decades. I understand you. I understand what you're saying. And this particular camera is more than 50 years old. So that's like receiving a message that traveled through time to reach me. I'm pretty sure its creators are probably dead by now, the designers of this camera, but I feel their presence. Being in there with those parts, that machinery, it's like reading their words or hearing their words. I've met a couple of people in my life and honestly doubted whether they have souls. I sometimes doubt whether people have souls, but I find it much harder to doubt that about a camera like this. I get up from working on something like that, and I feel I've been in communion with it. In those moments, I would say, yeah, it has a soul. I think this little camera has a beautiful soul. In that experience, in moments like that, that is when I understand the power of attention. I have attended to this thing with a desire to be there, to be with it, to know it, to be present with it. I have tended to it in the case of the camera I'm repairing. I have taken care of it. And that's really has been a profound experience for me. So I asked, can a program be about something? Could a love program exist? Well, here we are. I recreated my Canonet QL17 in object-oriented Python. In the code, its parts are Python objects, and their behaviors, the logic that's encoded into its mechanisms, they're in the relationships of the Python objects and their methods. The camera, in software, behaves like the real thing. So, I bring the camera into existence. It comes ready loaded with a roll of 100 ASA film. I advance the film lever, and the machinery some of that machinery you saw a few moments ago engages. It advances the film. It cocks the shutter. It applies the aperture value to the iris. That's actually what happens in the camera. I press the shutter release button. The light meter energizes and takes a reading that's applied to the iris. The shutter opens for a fraction of a second and closes again. Look at that second line in the output, applying aperture value of f16 to the iris. Behind the scenes at that moment, that's when the mechanism of the exposure control system comes into action. That's what's modeled in Python. One by one, its component parts interact with each other. The buttons and the levers and their movements. So all of its parts are modeled in Python objects. In fact, parts of my model are so complete that they include components that aren't even detailed in the service manual. But I discovered that I needed to model them in order to make it work. What happens when you open the back of a film camera before rewinding your film? You ruin the roll. Yeah. So you can find it all on GitHub, actually. It's well documented, of course. It's all in a single camera.py file. just a few hundred lines of fairly simple Python. For some reason, it's got 150 stars on GitHub. I'm not sure exactly what this said to someone else, but maybe it said something to somebody else. And why? What's the point of all this? What's it for? Well, it doesn't do anything. That's not what it's for. It's for me. Why? Because I love the camera. Why? Because of the really profound experience that I had in my encounter with it. Because I found something that moved me. Because I encountered something that astonished me. And I wanted to say it somehow. It's not a program that does anything, but it's a program about something. It's a love program to a camera. And this was a programming experience entirely about attention rather than intention, about being rather than doing. But we seem to value intention over attention so much. We stand these things up against each other. Intention seems to enjoy all the associations with being active and vigorous and having will, making a difference to the world, whereas attention means waiting or being passive, not making a difference to anything. And all these meanings and associations, they're not so clear-cut. What's active and what's passive comes in and out of focus at different times in different but related languages, English and Italian and French maybe. Sometimes a word will have one shade and sometimes another. So in English, to attend means to be present. Well, that feels quite neutral. But the emergency services, they attend an incident. That's not very passive. That seems pretty active to me. But in attendre, in French, or attendere in Italian, to wait, even to listen, that seems much more passive. In English, to assist sounds quite active, to help. In Italian, to assist, assistere, means something like to attend. It's not the only meaning. None of these things are the only meanings, but they have these shades of meanings. On the other hand, in English, when you say to study, the idea is of paying attention to something that is there, that exists. But in Italian, when you say studiare, you might be talking just as much about planning something, about something that you're going to bring into existence. So don't fixate on what seems to be active or passive. These shades come and go at different times, and they're all available in there. But the creation is not just about intention and will. Because there is active creation in attention just as much as in intention. There's active creation here. Garry Winogrand didn't bring those bodies into existence. He didn't arrange them. They were there. The arrangement of those bodies in the world is just a brute fact. It doesn't have meaning. But in his seeing, with his magnificent power to see, he created the photograph, the form, and the meaning. That's what his work is. His creation that emerges out of his attention. So we shouldn't conflate intention with creation or activity, or conflate attention and acts like seeing or listening with passivity. Because seeing and listening are very active ways of being. I spent so much time as a child in school chafing under this horrendous instruction to pay attention. And I remember the feeling of my childish body itching with frustration. They say pay attention, and pay is the right word because they really made me pay. I was made to pay and I got nothing in return. And I think that amongst the things that cost me, that I'm paying for still decades later, it took me decades of my life to understand and find and value attention as well as intention. The pleasure of intention was damaged in me as a child, I think. We live in an attention deficit world. I know I'm not the only one who might find a new value and meaning. And not just that, but a pleasure that was previously absent in attention. I was looking at the, I was checking what I'd written on the, the talk proposal, just to check that I was still talking about the same thing last night. And I saw this at the end of it. I saw on the website that that is, considering these questions about attention, can make a difference to us, even as practically minded programmers doing practical work. Well, I don't know why I said that. I wish I hadn't. It's absolute rubbish. What do I care about practically minded programmers? They can really take care of themselves and they don't need my help. They're not my problem. And anybody who thinks that I can give them... Anybody who thinks that they should be taking advice from me on being a better programmer really needs to have their head examined. None of this was about being a practical programmer. It's not why I'm talking about this at all. I'm talking about it because it matters to me, because I found something meaningful, and I hope you do too. Remember Mary Oliver, this fragment from her much longer poem, Instructions for Living a Life. Pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. You have to do all three of those things well. To pay attention, to notice things, to be there with them, and to be astonished, to have that response, to give something back of equal measure and value in your encounter with whatever it is that you encountered, and then to tell about it, to find a way to share it. So, I mean, actually, they might as well, they seem like instructions for being a photographer, or for writing a program about a camera, or maybe even for giving a talk at a conference. And that's what I've tried to do for you today. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Daniele, for your keynote. And now we have a few times for questions. I don't see any of them on slide. Okay, one question.
Or we can take them from the audience if not.
Yeah, we start with the first one on slide. Okay, I'll try to read it. Rodrigo say, I have the artistic sensibility of a rock. I don't understand why the picture you showed were so special. And this is the question.
No, why are the pictures that I showed so special? I said, one of the things I said, by the way, I'm sorry for all the scratchy noises. I think it's probably because I'm moving around and waving my arms. Can't be helped. To appreciate something, you do have to know it. You know, if you know nothing about painting or music, you will go to a gallery or to a concert. You think, well, so what? But as soon as you start to engage in that yourself, you really get a sense of what the meaning is. We shouldn't expect art to jump off the page or the wall and hit us. It hits us because we speak the language. If I recited the most moving or affecting poem to you in a language that you couldn't even understand, you wouldn't get the message. So you at least have to speak the language first. But one of the things that... Sorry, I think it's me. No, that's okay. As soon as you start trying to do it yourself, then you get a sense of what's going on. And the more you do that, the more you notice, the more you see and understand about what its value is. I mean, Rodrigo, if you really, be careful what you ask for, because I'm quite capable of sitting down with you and telling you all about some of those photographs. Yeah? So we can do that if you like. Well, okay, well, somebody wants to, how do I go back to slide? Let me see if I can find this slide. Maybe we're around here. Okay, this one. I mean, this is, you can see this. Let me go on that side because those people haven't hardly seen me behind that pillar. Look up there at that symmetry. There is no other place in the universe from which this photograph could have been taken except in that instant. And you had 1,000 cameras running non-stop, and they wouldn't have captured that. There is order. When you take a photograph, does it look like a kind of disordered jumble, or does it have something that is invested with meaning and value and form? Well, the meaning and value and form don't get in there by chance. They're put there by the eye of the photographer. It's not a photograph in a million or a trillion. It happened because it was created that way through someone's act of attention. And if as a photographer you just occasionally capture something a tiny little bit like that, you will understand the power of what's happening. The thing is, Winogrand was able to do this again and again and again and again. You know, I did it once, maybe, with 3 people. Him, his photograph with 8 people on that bench, other people behind. Look at the elbows. At that instant, it's like repeated forms in architecture, the hands and the fingers. Look at the way the knees and legs are bent and arranged, the bags underneath. And in music, we appreciate repetition and variation, and then the suddenness of improvisation, the thing that comes out of nowhere. We have all of those things in this photograph. Let's continue.
Okay, we have other questions. Next one is, in a world full of distraction, what are your tips of being attentive and focused?
Nobody should be asking me for tips for anything. Mary Oliver, pay attention, be astonished, and tell about it. I think actually the second one about being astonished is quite interesting, because often we don't allow ourselves this luxury of having a response to things. We go to a gallery or a museum or something and we want to see all the pictures. And we come out exhausted and can't remember any of the pictures. Whereas, sometimes I've got this in a book, sometimes I just open the book to look at that picture. It's like, go and put it on a record, I want to listen to this record, I go to the book and I just want to look at the picture. I want to have that experience. So, time, I think.
Next one. Isn't the fact there is so much of ourselves in our programs, but we like to think about them as a scientific and factual, one of the major issues with the craft?
Oh. I don't even know if that's true, the premise of that question, that we invest ourselves into our programs, but we like to think of them as scientific and rigorous. I don't know. Do we think? I just want my programs to work, to do what I wanted them to do, and all the stuff about rigor and discipline. Actually, those seem to be the values of the discipline, and I kind of pay lip service to them. But they don't thrill me or move me in any way. The excitement of programming is definitely not about that stuff. Maybe if I were working for NASA and responsible for spacecraft, I might have a different attitude. Yeah, that's an interesting. I don't know. Who asked that question? Do you really think that? What's your relationship with a program?
No, the point for me was also to making a connection also with pictures, with photographs, because from time to time, if you think about a picture, it's what is not in the picture is almost as important as what is in the picture, right? Because I have to choose what to show, and with the program it's more or less the same. I have to choose what to do. Exactly. So but one thing is seen as fully artistic, while another is seen more as something cold and factual. It works like this because it has to work like this.
Yeah. Well, okay. So think of I think the actual camera itself. I think that's where you find both of those, because it has to work in a certain way. It has to encode and embody that logic and do it precisely and accurately, and still do it 50 years later when the mechanism is born and so on. But looking at it, one of those cameras, I see beauty in there just as much, a different kind of beauty, but I see the same beauty. So I don't think there is a disjunction. Maybe if I were a better programmer, I would see more beauty in programs. You know, I just see code.
We have another question. If programmers are little gods, what about bugs?
Yeah, you know, there's always a snake in the Garden of Eden, isn't there? It's our imperfection. You know, we've been cast out of Eden. This is why we can't. Why we have to toil the earth and so on. We've been cast out of Eden. Our programs are going to have bugs. I think we should go back and have a look and see if that's actually mentioned in the book of Genesis. Probably it is. It's the original sin for programmers.
Okay, we have others. How can a programmer practice paying attention, and how can he realize if he does so?
What's the second part of that question? How can a programmer practice paying attention, and how can one realize if one does so? I'm not very good at paying attention. That's it. You know, occasionally I find myself. Well, I said, as a child, paying attention was the most hated thing, because I was told to do it when I didn't want to do it. When, as a poor little 5-year-old, I just needed doing something different, and I was made to listen or pay attention, like paying tribute. So it really took me a long time to discover it. In fact, I think that one of the reasons that I'm not so good as a photographer or at playing the guitar is that my ability to attend to things was diminished by my childhood experiences. And one of the places where I found it is in my connection with mechanical objects, with computers and cameras and other machines, because I love them, because I feel that there's a connection there that that gives me something back. So, again, I don't want to be responsible for giving people advice, but if there's something that absorbs you, that makes you there with it, then that's worth it. By the way, our relationships with other people, they're very transactional. Even in our intimate relationships, we say things because we want to have effects. We have a discussion. We want to assert things. We want to change the world. But listening in a relationship with a person, that's very difficult. Or just being there and understanding, that's very difficult. And it seems very passive and boring, and you just wait and you're not having an effect. Actually, the times I've had the most devastating effect on another person is not by doing anything, it's just by listening. And that has been when something has changed for them. It hasn't happened to me very often, once or twice in my life, but I've been really shocked by what happened once or twice in my life, when all I did was pay attention to somebody really carefully. And it wasn't because I made something happen. I didn't have an intention, but something did happen. And I remember those examples really clearly, and they really surprised me. But, you know, I'm at the age where I'm counting down instead of counting up. And I wish I'd realized some of that stuff a long, long time ago, not just recently.
Okay, thank you. I think we finished the time for questions, but I want to all of you give a round of applause to Daniele.